I'm excited to welcome back Dr. Bill Rahm to speak. He spoke last year on climate change and public health. He is a professor at New York University in Bellevue. Thank you. He grew up in Ely, Minnesota, grew up canoeing. He has been to all of the lakes in the Boundary Water Canoe Area Wilderness and Quetico. And he's going to talk about a canoeing adventure from the Voyageurs Highway to Lake Athabasca. Welcome, Dr. Bill Rahm.
Thank you, Lacey. I think this is my fifth Tuesday group. It might be the sixth. I think I missed a mug one year, but I see there's a mug here. Today we're going to be talking about canoeing. And we're going to have slides, video, and a trailer. And Lacey and I will be working on trying to get everything to work. So I was born on the West Coast of San Francisco. I was a war baby. My parents moved to Ely in 1946. From 1946 to 1947, my mother cried every day. I went to high school in Ely, graduating in 1963. I grew up in a store above Canoe Country Outfitters, like many people. You work downstairs routing canoe parties. I grew up as a wilderness canoe guide from 1959 to 1968. Then I was in medical school and then being a doctor. But I got married, and unbeknownst to my wife, Holly, and the Orange, we kept coming to Ely every August to go on a canoe trip on a route I haven't been on. So when I say I've been to all the lakes, she's been to most of them. This is the map. Everybody see the black lines? Those are the canoe routes that I've been on. And green is the Boundary Waters on the bottom, and yellow is the Quetico on the top. So actually, you'll have a chance to see that. They scanned it in at the Ely Echo, and there'll probably be an article about that, and also in the Timber Trade. So when you grow up in Ely,
Have you take a couple steps back?
yes, have to remember I'm on Zoom with you, and slides and videos and trailers.
Doing great.
Okay. So when you grow up in Ely and you canoe on all the Boundary Waters and the Quetico lakes, you really would like to do something up the Voyageurs Highway. That's your big dream. Ely was in the area of the Voyageurs Highway, because the Voyageurs Highway is actually the Canadian border. And you can see right here outlined in black with the Boundary Waters and the Quetico both south and north of the border, and including the border. So the Voyageurs in the 18th century would come with beaver pelts and pine marten and mink from all of the lakes up by Lake Athabasca and Fort Chipewyan to Grand Portage. And then the Voyageurs from Montreal would bring trading goods across the Great Lakes and Lake Superior, and have one grand old time at Grand Portage in July when they met up, drank all the rum, and then headed either north or back east. So Grand Portage was a very important trading post. As a youngster, you want to do the Grand Portage, but you really want to paddle a canoe to Hudson Bay. And if you were really lucky, to Fort Chipewyan and Athabasca Lake. So that's sort of the dream of a young Ely canoeist. So the Voyageurs are depicted in Jacques' painting, showing their birch bark canoes. And the Voyageurs were tough, short French men. I have now been 42 years in this country. This is a Voyageur talking about his life in 1825. For 24 hours, a light canoeman. I required but little sleep, but sometimes got less than I required. No portage was too long for me. All portages were alike. My end of the canoe never touched the ground till I saw the end of it. 50 songs a day were nothing to me. I could carry, paddle, walk, sing with any man I ever saw. No water, no weather ever stopped the paddle or the song. I wanted for nothing, and I spent all my earnings in the enjoyment of pleasure. 500 pounds, twice told, passed through my hands, although now I have not a spare shirt to my back, or a penny to buy one. Yet were I young again, I would willingly spend another half century in the same fields of enjoyment. There is no life so happy as the voyageur's life, none so independent, no place where a man enjoys so much variety and freedom as in the Indian country. Huzzah, huzzah. So anyway, the voyageurs were a lively bunch, and they were depicted by a couple of very well-known individuals in the wilderness business, Sig Olson and Bob Marshall. This is Sig Olson on the right. He was a mentor to my father. Got my father to go to Ely Junior College and then to the University of Minnesota. He was a mentor to me, so he spanned generations. And to the right of Sig Olson is Bob Marshall. He's the founder of the Wilderness Society. And I grew up reading about his exploits in Africa, the North Fork of the Koyukuk, 4 expeditions he made to climb a peak called Dunarak in the Brooks Range in Alaska. He never made it to the summit. So I was fortunate enough to go with a mountain climber and climb that mountain back in about 1992. The reason I'm showing Sig Olson is because he had a few statements about the 78 BWCA Wilderness Act. This is the most beautiful lake country on the continent. We can afford to cherish and protect it. Some places should be preserved from development or exploitation, for they satisfy a human need for solace, belonging, and perspective. In the end, we turn to nature in a frenzied, chaotic world, there to find silence, oneness, wholeness, spiritual release. So a whole major point about protecting wilderness is for the spiritual and the ethical and moral embodiment of wilderness. So we're lucky to have something like the Boundary Waters here. The second thing I'll say about the Boundary Waters is that they're full of rocks, campsites, portages. It's a wonderful place to canoe. It's almost tame. We see people, but it's very different to go to the north, to the rivers. They're wild. They're not tame. They're big rivers. They're roaring. You don't find the rocky campsites. There aren't any portages. There are no people. You're remote. You're on your own. And much of my travels were before satellite phones, and there was no way to escape. You had to get from here to there, and your life depended on it. These trips are extremely dangerous. I can't emphasize that enough. You're on your own. It's extremely important that the people you travel with are really tough people. Your life depends on them. So I'll say a little bit more as we go. So this is a map of Ontario. And I'll point out a few rivers. This is James Bay, Hudson Bay, Lake Superior. You see they were in Albany. This is the Albany River. That's the first river I had an opportunity to paddle down. The talk today is going to be mostly about the Winisk River, which is this river here, and Winisk Lake at Wenisk. So in 1965, I had the chance to guide a trip down the Albany. We actually drove a pickup on this red road north of Lake Superior. We drove it to the Trans-Canada Railroad right about here, and we paddled on down rivers to the Ogoki, and then to the Albany, and this lake called the Bannock Lake, and then all the way down the Albany River to Fort Albany. So that's 1965. Usually each of these rivers is an hour talk. I have only one slide of that trip, and that's the one that my father took at the end of it, of the 4 of us reaching Fort Albany at Hudson Bay. So you're relieved, you just missed 59 minutes of a talk. That's me, that's Bruce Hoppin, Rudy and John, the 2 people I guided. We had 2 canoes. We surpassed John Flett Rapids, Gus Walsky, a guide here in Ely, told me that he actually got swept down and survived it. We got through Kagami Rapids, Martin Falls, which was a huge waterfall. We portaged around it, and the map said that there's no more waterfalls. We paddled around the corner, and there was another waterfall just as large that wasn't even on the map. So you have to be careful. In 1967, it was the summer before medical school for me, and it was the last chance to actually do a huge canoe trip. I talked Tommy Dayton here in Ely to go with me. We couldn't find a third person, but I heard on the rumors that Jack Nemi was collecting welfare. And I went to Jack Nemi's father here in Ely and said, "Can I take your son with me up to Hudson Bay?" He said, "Yeah, great. Get him to go with you." So Jack Nemi was our third person. He's a Finlander. He's now deceased, but he ran Border Lakes Outfitters. And we had three pretty tough hombres. The deacon of the local church, St. Anthony's, Greg Hutar, was our driver. He drove us up to Winnipeg, and then on Trans-Canada to Alberta. And then this is the Mackenzie Highway. And he drove us up on that. There's a river coming out of the Rockies called the Peace River. So we decided we'd start on the Peace River. And here is Lake Athabasca and Fort Chipewyan, where I always dreamed that someday we could go to that fur post. Normally the voyageurs came from the south, but we went across Lake Athabasca, up the Fond du Lac River to Wollaston Lake, over the Arctic Divide to Reindeer Lake, down to Reindeer River, and all the way down to Churchill. That's 1,517 miles. And it took us 40 days. So you can do the math. I packed 30 days of food, and we had 40 days. So we did some fishing, caught fish on the way. So this is Vermilion Falls on the Peace River. On our first camp, we saw that this water was brown. It was full of glacial silt. We took off our t-shirts and filtered this glacial silt through our t-shirts. We went right through. So when we drank the water, it would crunch as we went glacial silt. So we reached Fort Chipewyan. This is Tommy Dayton and the Hudson's Bay Company store in Fort Chipewyan. We finally made it there. We crossed that off. And this is Lake Athabasca. You can't see the other side. There's something I'm not going to tell you. Screw-ups. You want to know any screw-ups? Misadventures. I could spend an hour on misadventure, so I'm going to pass the misadventure. We did have problems trying to cross Lake Athabasca. We ended up paddling at night and going along the shore. It was a huge lake, 200 miles across. There's just no way you can get a canoe across that lake. And we had tremendous aurora borealis as we paddled all night long. But it was quite an adventure. Since we had a misadventure, I lost one contact. My glasses and the camera were all destroyed. And this is 1967. There's no way to reach anybody. And after 40 days, Bill Rom Sr., my father, I was starting to wonder what happened to his son. And my dad had a Cessna 180 on floats. And he decided that he would go by himself as a one-man search party to see if we were still alive. So this is his picture from the plane. That's the Churchill River. That's the lower Churchill River. If any of you can figure out a way down that, please let me know. You see some rapids. There's just, on many of these rivers, there's just no way down except straight down the rapids and try to go in and out of them. We did hang up on a rock once and the canoe filled mostly with water, but we got the buckets out and bailed it out and kept going. And this is arrival at Churchill on Hudson Bay. I'm in the right here. This is Jack Nemi and Tommy Dayton. This is a centennial marker since it was the 150 years of Canada's centennial at that time, or 100 years from 1867 to 1967. Okay, so I told Sig Olson about that, and then I told him that I was really inspired by his book, The Lonely Land, about the Churchill River. But we wanted to do a canoe trip in the Barren Lands, way up in the Arctic. And this is a map of Canada. I told him I would like to do this river way up in the Arctic called the Back River. He says, well, good luck. So I was able to talk that mountain climber who did the Dunarak climb with me and going, and then a friend, medical student from the university. And we flew to Yellowknife on Great Slave Lake. And then we chartered a plane to go right to the source of the Back River, to canoe that river. And then we would paddle about 300 miles down the river to about there. And then get picked up by the plane and brought back. This is Turbo Beaver in Great Slave Lake. You can see our canoe is lashed to the pontoons. This plane has a range of about 600 miles, so you could fly 300 miles and then come back. The problem is to pick us up because we went 300 miles further. So you get the point, he was at the end of his range just to get to us. So the whole plane was full of 45 gallon aviation fuel tanks so that you could hand pump the aviation fuel into the wing tanks. The next problem is we were to start at Elmer Lake. This is Elmer Lake. It's completely covered with ice. We're really up in the Arctic, and so you're flying around trying to find a place to land. And the pilot went to the north end and landed into a little lake that was open and said, "This is the source of the Back River," and said goodbye. And then that was the end of the plane. So we started portaging and canoeing down the Back River. This is an example of what it looks like. There's snow along the edges. There are no trees. This is barren lands. We had ropes on the front and back. And you can see it's like all these northern rivers full of rapids. The rapids get bigger and bigger. You can see that there are bugs. You have both mosquitoes and black flies. And you can see that we're having lunch that you have to remember to lift that mosquito head net up as you take a bite. We were able to line a lot of the rapids and go along the shore because there were no trees or bushes. Every time we came to a rapids like this, we would climb the hill and try to look for a passage through the river. And sometimes when we climbed the hill, we would be eye to eye with muskox. We saw over 100 muskox on this trip. They're really fascinating to see. This is just with a regular camera, not a telephoto. So we were walked right up to them before they trotted off. We were in the migration of the Beverly caribou, Barren Lands caribou herd. They were swimming across the river. We could paddle right up next to them. This is a picture just showing them swimming right next to the canoe. And this is the group. I'm on the far right. This is Ted Luck, who's a physician, and that's Stan Lupto, who's a mountain climber from Seattle. The next canoe trip took a lot of talking to convince my able partner to go on this trip. It's a trip called the Nahanni. The Nahanni is a very famous river because it's the Grand Canyon of Canada. It's located right here, going down to the Lier. So to get there, you have to fly again to Yellowknife. You charter a plane to Fort Simpson, and then you charter a Twin Otter into the river, and then you have to be flown out once you get to the end. So from the plane, you get a view of Virginia Falls. Virginia Falls is 2.5 times the height of Niagara. It's a massive waterfall. The rock in the center has been called Mason's Rock for the most famous canoeist of Canada, Bill Mason. Bill Mason has canoed the Nahanni. He's the famous man of paddling, and Half of the Paddle is his book. So one of the sculptures in Whiteside Park will be of Bill Mason paddling a canoe through a rapids. So we landed just above the falls and spent a day portaging over a mile through the falls. There's my canoeing partner, Holly Neeker Rom. when we got into a canvas covered canoe, she said, looked at the current and the clear water going so fast, and said, this is life threatening. So we had 2 covered canvas canoes, and then we had a Voyageur canoe, which was specially designed by Neil Hartling of Nahanni River Adventures that could fit inside a plane and then would be bolted together. So he had 7 people in that, 2 in ours, 2 in others. So he was providing a guided trip at that time. So we didn't have to do the lunch or the dinners. There's his Voyageur canoe. You can see it's a huge canyon. This is the famous Pulpit Rock. And you can see the canyon sides. They're having a cup of tea with Mrs. Rom. And she took a picture of me in our covered canoe with my paddle. A paddle. All right. So now we're going to have an intermission while we get the trailer set up. And Lacey and I will give you a second to stretch.
I want this to go full screen.
Okay.
And then, yeah, we'll just put the microphone up to it. Let's give them a moment. They really took the intermission seriously. They're not quite ready.
Got to end the.
We'll give them
end the slideshow.
Oh, shoot. Interesting.
How do we do that? You gotta go back up.
Was it like water morning?
All right, folks, are you ready?
Straight.
Beautiful.
We gotta get back.
You gotta find yourself a friend who will do that.
Yeah.
This is a new movie?
Coming to the gel this summer. You're gonna see it now.
Here you go. You can flip through to the right spot.
Okay.
Bill.
So this was made by Ron Bayans, who is one of the canoeists on the journey. And as I said, it's really important to get good people to go with you. Ron Bayans has canoed through Eastern Canada and through the Northern Tier here in Ely with Boy Scout groups for a number of years. And he's the sculptor of the Bill Mason canoeing bronze sculpture that will be in Whiteside Park. Bob Wade is a friend from Aspen, Colorado. He's a mountain climber. He's climbed all the peaks above 14,000 feet in the state of Colorado. He's been a retailer running Ute Mountaineer sports for his career in Aspen. And more importantly, he's a river runner. So he leads raft trips throughout the rivers in the west. So getting these three people to go on a canoe trip on the Winisk was a real feat. Wenisk River. So this is where I grew this beard this summer. So we did this July 14th to the 30th. And I told you before that this is Lake Superior. This is the road. This is the Albany River that in 1965. We actually went up this way to Paganagani Lake, Churchill River, Fort Hope. Much of this in green is protected as a provincial park. The Winisk River is the Athabasca, and that's also protected as a provincial park. And then here's Lake Winisk and the Winisk River going straight north to Hudson Bay. So this is Hudson Bay, this is James Bay. And green, it's all protected as a provincial park. Up here, this green outline is Polar Bear Provincial Park. It's the largest park in Ontario. It's 6 million acres, so it's 6 times the size of the Quetico. So our goal was to paddle down the Winisk River and look for caribou and polar bears at Hudson Bay and try to find out what's going on with climate change. So first of all, we had to get to Winisk Lake. As you can see, there's a road that goes through Thunder Bay, around Lake Superior, and you can drive right up to this town called Nahanni. So we contacted Nahanni to charter a plane to carry our canoe to Winisk Lake, which is Lebeki. Lebeki is the Cree village, and then we would have to charter another plane from the other Cree village at Juana all the way back to our pickup truck here at Nahanni. So those are the major expenses of doing this. There's aviation fuel surcharges this summer because the price of oil has gone up. But it's quite an adventure just even getting there. The first 100 miles of Winisk is all rapids, and the distance from here to here is 295 miles. So we planned on 12 days for the trip. This is the Otter. It's a single engine Otter. It's the workhorse of the Canadian North. And here's our canoe. I bought a used Source River 18.5 foot canoe from Voyageur North Outfitters here in Ely. And it was ample for 3 men and our 3 rubber packs that were lashed into the canoe. Here we are in the plane. This is Bob Wade up front. That's me in the back. And this is Ron Baynes. This is the first Cree village, Lebeki. It's on Winisk Lake. There are 31 indigenous independent nations of the Swampy Cree. They are the indigenous peoples of Northern Ontario going on into Manitoba. Each band is a nation and has to be dealt with by the Canadian government independently. They have their own budget, and they have a confederation to work a little bit together. Once again, goodbye to the plane. We're on our own. We wandered around Webekwi. They had a small school with a wooden teepee at the entrance. This is the Webekwi First Nation. Every nation has to have a flag. And their band headquarters had a number of beautiful art paintings. But then we were off on Winisk Lake. It's a big lake. We're very fortunate that it was calm on the crossing. We got to the far side and immediately saw what the river was like. It's huge. The water's high. It's full of rapids, and it looks extremely dangerous. And it got our attention right away. So we started the first part of the trip carrying everything. You can see that we're in the woods looking at the river. And the canoe water within a couple of waves, and you'd be at the mercy. There were no portages. You just bushwhacked every one. This one, there was an old blaze on a tree that we could find. But there are no trails. You just have to go until you get to the bottom of the rapids. The rapids are from one side to the other of the river, and it really doesn't calm down much between the rapids. In between them, you have mosquitoes, and that look on my face probably describes what it's like to have nothing but rapids in front of you continually. This is a rapids where you can see that there's rapids way over here, and we're on the right side. And along this rapids, we found a little bit of a channel, and we pulled the canoe through the channel through the grasses and bushes and what have you, just to avoid the rapids. I think on the trip, we found 2 or 3 rocks instead of the boundary waters. This is one of the rocks where we say, hey, there's a rock. Let's move it. Let's stop for lunch. You can see the river is broad. You can see the current going down the middle of it. You're with black spruce as your main tree. The black spruce is just along the river. If you were to go 100 meters one side or the other, you're in tundra and sphagnum moss. There are a few tamaracks here and there, and occasionally you'll see a isolated group of aspens or birch trees. And as soon as you paddle a few strokes, you come back again to rapids like these. One thing that we discovered was right along the shore, you might be able to paddle a canoe and avoid big waves. So we would go with about 2 to 5 feet from shore, just very slowly, and we could get down some rapids. But sometimes you just have to grin and bear it. And here we're trying to get around the rapids, and it's a steep hill, and we couldn't carry the canoe up the hill, so we got the ropes out and roped the canoe up the hill, pulling and pushing, and then more rapids after that. We passed several goose hunting camps for the Cree. They had little cabins like this, but there was nothing inside of them. This is our second rock, so we pitched camp there. There are some moose. We saw one woodland caribou. This is just our rock by our camp, and there's rapids you can see just in the current by the camp. So here's the continuation of rapids. Some of these you just have to portage because they're really waterfalls. And then we came to 6 of them that had names on them. This is one of the named rapids. It's called Tashka Rapids. And every time you come around the corner, you see that light in front of you. It begins to get to you because it's very dangerous. We tried throwing a log in there to see if it would emerge from that whirlpool. It never did. Here we are portaging around those rapids, having a lunch break on the other side. So this is our 18.5 foot canoe. We had 3 packs lashed in with the rope, 1 day pack on top, and there was a seat here for the 3rd person. I usually would take stern, Ron would be in the bow, and Bob would be in the middle, where he could stand up and look at the rapids ahead of us, at least to tell us right side or left side. If we could get the right side or the left side right, then we might be able to edge our way down, and then if we came to a real swirl, then we'd portage. Here you can see that even between the rapids, my expression isn't a smile, it's that there's current and waves and white ahead of you. This is Basting Falls, another named rapids. Here we had a little bit of grass that we could walk along and portage around it. And there's another rock below it that we could actually have a camp and relax and take the head net off for a few minutes and have some tea. But this is what it's like in your tent. Those mosquitoes are on the outside. And they seem to get up your pants and bite right above the socks. So you're supposed to always put your pants inside your socks. A lot of beautiful flowers along the route. So this is Seashell Rapids. It gives you an idea of rapids all the way across the river. We decided we'd portage over this rock island. So you can see there's a swift current here and then a rapids to my right. So what we did here is we paddled with the nose of the canoe going upstream and inched our way across the river so that we could hit this rock like that, and then portage everything over the rock. And we thought that if you could get below this rapids here, you could then have lunch. We had sausage, salami, and cheese, and we found out that it was a lot better if you made a little tiny fire and melted the cheese and had a toasted cheese sandwich. Around every corner there was a bald eagle. We're beginning to think that it was the same eagle, just keep flying ahead of us. But it was so common that the eagles live off the fish on the river, so it's very bountiful for them. So Bob Wade, here in the foreground, had a satellite phone. He was in touch with his wife, and who came to Ely for the end of July, and she was in touch with him every day that we were making progress. We're getting around the rapids. If you miss be contacting you in a 24-hour period, call in the cavalry. So we did have a contact that if something happened to us, we would be able to be rescued. We had no idea who would be rescuing us, but hopefully there would be a plane or something. We never saw a single person or a single bush plane at all on the entire trip. Here's one of the Cree goose hunting cabins. You can see that we always have the head nets on. One of the things I was looking for from climate change was melting of or thawing of the permafrost. And here it looked like an area from the bank where the permafrost had melted and then had slid into the river. We were looking for caribou. We found one beautiful woodland caribou. They're a deep chocolate brown and muscular animal with antlers that are a little bit smaller than the Barren Lands caribou, but very majestic. And they do get into, we couldn't figure out how the Cree could live on these because they're solitary animals. But on the Hudson Bay coast, they form herds, and the Cree then hunt them on when they're in herds where they can find them. We had good weather, sunny weather, which looked just like Ely. All of a sudden it ends, and then you have a week of bad weather. Here come the clouds. You can see the size of this river. I was wondering how come nobody's heard of the Winisk River. This is a gigantic river. It's full of current, and that looks like the Mississippi. We thought we were done with the rapids after about 100 miles of being below them. This is Limestone Rapids right before Hudson Bay. You can see we're on limestone ledges. And here the weather turned bad and it started to rain. You can see our waterproof packs and carrying the canoe. We saw one cairn, which was a spot where we could put the canoe in the water and then paddle along the limestone cliffs, still in rapids. And then we finally came to a dock, and we knew we were at the airport at Pewanuck. And you can see the dock here. We got out and took this final picture with one of the iPhones showing us on our last day. We were totally wet, and this was in between complete shaking and shivering because we were so hypothermic. We paddled on down to the entrance to Pewanuck, and the Cree have these Nor'wester boats that are beautiful. They're made in Quebec. They're big enough for out on Hudson Bay and these big rivers. So each family had one of these Nor'wester canoes. We walked into the village, and I had corresponded to Marie Smack about taking us out to Hudson Bay to look for polar bears. And the village of Pewanuck has about 300 people. Everybody's in their house. We finally found Maurice He took us in his pickup truck over to one of the houses and he gave us a house to stay in. So we actually had hot water with internet. And we knew that then the trip was over. But he took us out to Hudson Bay. You can see that we had life jackets on and big heavy coats, and this is big gloves. And this is summer. This is July on Hudson Bay. And he had a big boat with a motor. This is Maurice Mack with his life jacket, his coat on. But we had cloudy weather with fog. This is the Sheraton on Hudson Bay. It's a shack. There are a couple bunk beds in there, and there's a stove where we can cook food. That's Maurice and all of us at that hut. This was his vehicle called an RG that would take us out on the flats of Hudson Bay to look for polar bears. This is a 4x4 that we would use. We would walk on the shore of Hudson Bay, and we had an Explorers Club flag to look for evidence of climate change on Hudson Bay. And we found that the willows were moving north, the northern pike were moving north. We asked about the polar bears, and the polar bears, they said, were basically holding their own. It's a distinct subspecies of polar bear that lives along Hudson Bay. And we did find some elders who said that the old Winisk town site had snow in September, but Pewanuck did not. What happened was that in 1986, the ice came down the Wenisk River and destroyed the old village of Winisk on the shore of Hudson Bay. And they moved the village to Pewanuck, 20 miles upriver up on a high bluff, so that they would be ice free. This is hiking. You can see the caribou tracks on Hudson Bay. We did see one polar bear with our field glasses, but nothing up close. A lot of sandpipers, caribou tracks. We went out to try to look for the white beluga whales, but it was all fog. So we really couldn't get out very far into the Hudson Bay to see the belugas. I had seen them at Churchill when we arrived by canoe at Churchill. So then we had 3 days in Pewanuck waiting for weather to clear. We had only visual flight rules, so we couldn't get out of Pewanuck. Maurice brought us caribou to eat, so we had a caribou feast every evening. That's the local church. The houses were all these prefab houses. Everybody had the same house. It had 2 bedrooms. It had downstairs and upstairs. They all had a satellite dish for internet and TV. They all had a teepee out back where they smoked caribou and fish and geese. They had 3 things they ate. One night caribou, one night geese, one night fish. The fish were from gill nets, and they're mostly speckled trout and walleye. So it's kind of a socialist community. Everybody has the same thing. Everybody had a pickup. Everybody had a 4x4. Everybody had a Norwest boat and a new outboard motor. And we're wondering, how do they make any money? Because they said trapping was no good anymore because the Russians dominated the fur market. They heated their house with wood. They would go up the rivers and get firewood. So the largest building in the community was the band administration building. This building was for their budget. So they get a budget from the Canadian government that everybody gets an equal amount. So it's sort of like a socialist society where nobody's ahead of anybody else. I asked, how do they get along? They said, we just have to get along. And there's about 6 or 7 families. So everybody is a second cousin to everybody else. And they all seem quite happy. So this is Polar Bear Provincial Park. You can see the woodland caribou herds. So they, in the summertime, are along the coast. In the wintertime, they migrate south into the forest to get moss to eat. One of the problems is that with global warming, instead of getting snow, they get rain, and then the rain freezes, and they have a hard time getting through the frozen ice on top of the snow to get to the moss to eat. This is the polar bears. The polar bears are right on the edge of the coast, and they migrate when there's ice out onto the bay to hunt seals. Polar bears are a special species of Hudson Bay polar bears. This is their Winisk First Nation. You, as a Cree nation, you can't be a nation unless you have a flag. So here's their flag. I had to wait until the wind would unfurl it a little bit. I walked around town. This is Sean Matthew, married to the woman who ran the local clinic. The local clinic had a nurse who was the wife of Marie Smack, and they had one other nurse who would fly up. They had a school. They would go to school to the 8th grade, and then they would go to Timmins, Ontario, for high school. And hopefully they would come back. One of Marie Smack's children stayed in Timmins, and they were quite upset that they didn't come back to Pewaukee. So this is the airport to leave. We were there for 4 days until the sun came out. One of the sad things is we had to leave our canoe in Hudson Bay. This is our 18.5-foot Voyageur North canoe that I bought for $21.47 and sold to Maurice for $250. No wonder we got a house in Caribou.
Yeah.
So he's taking that to a little lake where he's going to be using it. That's our caravan plane coming in for a landing, and that's the Wenisk River as we fly out. And I'll end it with one story about climate change. And there's a cartoon that maybe you have all seen. It's the last polar bear on a last speck of ice before it melts. And it's kind of a nice cartoon to always show what's happening with Arctic warming, which is about 4 times faster than the rest of the world. So Maurice had this video on his phone, so he used AirDrop to send it to me. And this is from earlier in the summer, where he was with his boat on Hudson Bay, and they were taking a movie of a couple of icebergs. And thank you. The Explorers Club flag. I have to bring this back to the club as soon as we get back to New York. So this has been the Hudson Bay,
Yeah.
and all the way down the Winisk River. I don't know where else it's been, but it may have been to the moon. It may have been to the deepest part of the Pacific. It may have been to the top of Mount Everest. It's flag number 118. I'll try to find out the history of this, to see where it's been. This is my, I think, 5th flag, and I think 5th Tuesday group.
Yes.
Thank you.